Presenting our podcast, Got Milk, the Indian Dairy Context, brought to you by Shunya Agritech, India's first animal nutrition and well-being focused organization. Say hello to your hosts, Gear and Sahil.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking at something really interesting, the world of Indian dairy.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be diving deep into how India went from milk shortages to a global dairy superpower.
It's a wild story.
Yeah, and we're also going to look at some of the challenges they face moving forward.
Right.
Our main source for this deep dive is a research paper that looks at milk production and consumption across India.
Okay.
With a special focus on the state of Tamil Nadu.
Sounds fascinating. I mean, it really is an incredible transformation when you think about it.
It is, yeah.
It's not just about milk, it's like this whole web of government initiatives and economic growth, even like cultural shifts,
Yeah, you're right. It is a much bigger picture than I think a lot of people realize.
For sure.
I mean, just a few decades ago, India wasn't even producing enough milk for its own people.
Right. They had to import it from other countries.
Exactly. And now they're producing over 20% of the global supply.
It's crazy how much things have changed.
How on earth did that happen?
Well, a big part of it is this program they launched back in the 1970s called Operation Flood.
Operation Flood.
Yeah, it's considered one of the most successful dairy development programs ever.
Okay.
And it wasn't just about increasing the number of cows or anything like that.
Right.
It was about totally changing the whole dairy system,
So how did they do that?
Okay, so there were a few key things.
Okay.
First, they focused on helping small dairy farmers, like the ones who just have a few cows.
Okay.
They organized them into these groups called cooperative.
Cooperatives, right?
Yeah, and this gave the farmers more power. They could work together to get better prices for their milk.
Okay, that makes sense.
They also got access to other resources like vets and better breeding techniques.
Ah, I see.
The second thing Operation Flood did was invest in building a national milk grid.
A milk grid? What is that?
It's basically like a network of chilling centers, processing plants, and transportation systems.
Yeah.
So they could get the milk from the farms to the people who needed it quickly and efficiently without it spoiling.
So they focused on helping the farmers and then building the infrastructure to get the milk where it needed to go.
Exactly. That was the genius of it.
Wow, that's really impressive.
And it worked. Between 1991 and 2019, the amount of milk available per person in India more than doubled.
Wow, that's a huge increase.
Yeah, and here's another interesting thing.
Yeah.
India consumes almost all of the milk it produces.
Oh, wow, so they don't export much.
Not really, no.
That's pretty amazing. It shows just how important dairy is in Indian culture.
Absolutely. Milk and milk products are like a staple in their diet,
Yeah, for sure.
part of their everyday life.
Now, the research paper we're looking at focuses on one state in particular, Tamil Nadu.
Right, Tamil Nadu.
It kind of uses it as a case study to look at the bigger picture of the Indian dairy industry.
Interesting. Why Tamil Nadu specifically?
Well, over the past decade, their milk production has been growing really fast.
Okay.
Like over 4% every year.
Wow, that's even faster than the national average.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real success story.
But I guess the interesting thing is that this growth isn't the same everywhere in the state.
Right. There's some pretty big variations.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, if you look at graph 1 in the paper, you can see it pretty clearly.
Let me see.
It compares milk production in Salem, which is a mostly rural district,
Okay.
to Chennai, which is a big city.
Right, I see it.
And the difference is pretty stark. Salem produces way more milk than Chennai.
That makes you wonder, is there a connection between how urbanized the place is and how much milk it produces?
Yeah, that's a great question. Could it be that as cities grow and people's lifestyles change, milk production kind of takes a back seat?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
It's fascinating how even within one state, you can see these different trends playing out.
It really highlights the complexity of this whole thing.
Right.
We often focus on the total amount of milk being produced, but we also need to consider the regional differences and the economic factors.
Yeah, for sure.
And it makes you wonder if what's happening in Tamil Nadu might start happening in other states as they become more urbanized.
Definitely something to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
But even with all this amazing growth, there are still some big challenges facing the dairy industry in India.
Right. There are definitely some hurdles they need to overcome.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to look at next.
Let's dive in.
So we've talked about this amazing growth in Indian dairy, but as you mentioned, there are some challenges too.
Yeah, definitely some hurdles to overcome.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that the research paper highlights?
Well, they kind of break it down into a few different categories, which is helpful.
Okay.
They look at production level challenges,
Okay.
cooperative level,
Uh-huh.
marketing and processing,
Right.
and then policy and infrastructure.
Got it. So it really is like this whole system they have to think about.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Yeah, makes sense.
So let's start with production, like what's happening on the farms themselves. One of the big issues is that a lot of the dairy farms in India are pretty small,
Yeah.
like just a few cows,
Okay.
and they often don't have access to the things they need to be really successful.
Like what kind of things?
Well, things like good quality feed for the cows
Okay.
and regular veterinary care.
Ah, I see.
Even just proper housing for the animals can be a challenge.
Right.
So if the farmers are struggling to just keep their animals healthy,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to produce a lot of milk.
That makes sense. Is the feed thing a big issue then?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
As India's population grows, there's more and more demand for land to grow food for people.
Right.
So that means less land for growing fodder for animals.
So there's like competition for the land.
Yeah, exactly. So it's hard for the farmers to get enough nutritious feed for their cows.
And that affects how much milk the cows can produce.
Right. It impacts both the quantity and the quality.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah. And then you got the whole issue of disease outbreaks, too. If there's not good access to vets,
Yeah.
and if hygiene practices aren't great,
Yeah.
diseases can spread like wildfire.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, a whole herd of cows can be wiped out.
Oh, wow. So it can have a huge impact on production.
For sure.
Now, we talked about the cooperatives earlier and how important they were to the success of Operation Flood.
Right. The cooperative.
But it sounds like even at that level, there are challenges.
Yeah, fortunately there are.
The paper mentions that a lot of farmers still choose to sell their milk outside the cooperative system.
Yeah, that's right.
Why is that? I mean, doesn't it make more sense to work together?
Well, sometimes it's just easier for the farmers,
Okay.
They might have a local vendor they've been selling to for years.
Right, a relationship they've built.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or they might just find it more convenient to sell directly in their village.
Yeah, I get that.
But there are also some problems with the cooperatives themselves,
Okay, what kind of problem?
Sometimes there's a lot of bureaucracy involved.
Right,
It can be complicated to join or even just to deal with the paperwork.
right.
And sometimes there are issues with the management of the cooperatives.
Okay.
The farmers might not trust the people in charge.
So they don't feel like it's really benefiting them.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The cooperatives are meant to empower the farmers,
Right.
but sometimes the way they're run can actually make the farmers feel powerless.
So it's a challenge to get them to buy into the system.
It is, for sure.
And what about the whole marketing and processing side of things?
Well, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, what are some of the big issues there?
One of the biggest is just keeping the milk from spoiling.
Oh, right.
Milk is really perishable,
Yeah.
especially in India's hot climate.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And without proper chilling facilities, a lot of it just goes bad.
Wow, that's a lot of wasted milk.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
So they need a better system for keeping it cold.
Exactly. They
Right.
need what's called a cold chain.
A cold chain.
Yeah, it's basically a system where the milk is kept cold the whole way from the farm to the consumer.
Ah, okay, so like refrigerated trucks and things like that.
Right. Trucks, chilling centers, storage facilities.
Wow, so without that, all the work the farmers and the cooperatives are doing is kind of pointless.
Pretty much, yeah.
It must be so frustrating for them to see their milk go to waste.
It is, absolutely.
And then on top of that, you've got the problem of quality control.
Right. That's another big one.
Paper talks about milk adulteration.
Yeah, sometimes people will water down the milk.
Oh, wow, so they're basically cheating people.
Yeah. Or they'll mix in other things to try and increase the volume or the fat content.
It's crazy that people would do that.
It is, and it's not just about cheating people out of money,
Right.
It can also be dangerous for people's health.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it really undermines trust in the whole system.
Yeah, for sure.
And then finally, you've got the broader policy and infrastructure issues.
Okay, so what are some of the...
Well, one of the big things is that you've got these two different milk markets operating side by side.
What do you mean?
You've got the organized market,
Mhm.
which is like the cooperatives and the big companies.
Okay.
They have to follow certain rules and standards.
Right.
But then you've also got this whole unorganized market.
Which is what...
Basically, it's just people selling milk informally,
Mhm.
like on the street or whatever.
Okay.
And they don't have to follow the same rule.
So they can sell it for cheaper?
Exactly.
And that makes it harder for the organized market to compete.
Yeah, it's not really a fair playing field.
That makes sense.
And then on top of that, the pricing system can be really unpredictable.
Right.
Farmers don't always know how much they're going to get for their milk.
So it's hard for them to plan ahead.
Exactly. It makes it really risky for them.
It seems like all these challenges are kind of connected in a way.
Yeah, they all feed into each other.
And we keep coming back to this need for better infrastructure, like that cold chain we were talking about.
Yeah, the cold chain is really key.
It affects everything, the spoilage, the quality, the prices.
Right, it's a fundamental issue.
So even with all these challenges, the demand for milk in India is still going up.
It is. It's crazy.
How is that possible?
Well, India has a huge population, and it's growing fast.
Yeah.
And as people get wealthier, they tend to eat more dairy products.
Right.
Plus, there's this growing idea that milk is like a superfood,
Oh, interesting.
especially for kids.
Okay.
So people are really buying into that.
So it's like this weird situation where you have this booming demand, but at the same time, the industry is facing all these serious problems.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma.
So what happens next? I mean, can they keep up with this demand and solve all these problems at the same time?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's like a race against time.
Yeah, it really does feel like kind of a make or break moment for Indian dairy.
It does,
Yeah, I mean, they've come so far,
Right.
but they've got all these hurdles in front of them.
Yeah, for sure. So what can they do?
Yeah. What does the research paper suggest?
Well, they've got a few ideas.
Okay.
It's not going to be easy. It's not like one simple fix.
Right.
It's going to take a whole bunch of different things working together.
So where do they start?
Well, let's go back to those production level challenges.
Okay, so helping the farmers produce more milk and better quality milk.
Exactly.
So how do we do that?
Well, one thing is focusing on the cows themselves,
That's right.
trying to improve the breeds
Right.
through things like genetic selection
Okay.
and making sure more farmers have access to artificial insemination.
So basically breeding cows that are better suited to India's climate.
Right, and cows that are more resistant to diseases.
Yeah, that makes sense. So healthier cows, more milk.
Exactly.
And what about the feed issue? Any solutions there?
Yeah, there are a few things they can try.
Okay.
One is to encourage farmers to grow more high-quality fodder crops.
Right. Instead of just the regular stuff.
Right, and they can also look into using agricultural byproducts to create new types of feed.
Oh, interesting. So like using stuff that would normally be wasted.
Exactly. It's like recycling for cows.
I like it. Very sustainable.
Yeah, and it could help ensure a more reliable supply of feed.
Okay, so better breeds, better feed. That takes care of the cows.
Right.
But what about the cooperative challenges?
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
How do we get more farmers to participate?
Well, the paper suggests that technology could be a big help here.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, imagine if there were like apps or online platforms that made it easier to join and interact with the cooperatives.
Okay.
So instead of having to deal with a bunch of paperwork,
Yeah,
farmers could just do everything on their phone.
that would be way more convenient.
Right. And it would also make it easier for the cooperatives to communicate with the farmers.
Keep them in the loop.
Exactly. So it would be more transparent,
Yeah, so the farmers would feel more involved.
Right. More like they're part of the decision-making process.
I think that could make a big difference.
Yeah, I think so too.
And technology could also help with the cold chain stuff, right?
Absolutely. That's a huge area where technology can make a real impact.
So like using sensors to monitor the temperature of the milk as it's being transported.
That's a great example. You could have sensors in the trucks, in the storage facilities, everywhere.
So you'd know instantly if something was going wrong.
Exactly. And you could take steps to fix it before the milk spoils.
Wow, that would be a game changer.
Yeah, it would really revolutionize the way they handle milk in India.
And it would also help with the adulteration problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure. If you can track the milk from the farm to the store,
Right.
it's much harder for someone to tamper with it.
So consumers would know they're getting the real deal.
Exactly. It builds trust.
Okay, so we've got technology helping with a lot of this.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture stuff like policy and infrastructure?
Yeah, the government needs to step up too,
Okay, what can they do?
Well, they can offer incentives for companies to invest in cold chain infrastructure,
Okay.
like tax breaks or subsidies.
Right.
They can also provide more support for research into better breeding practices.
So kind of like what they did with Operation Flood.
Yeah, exactly. Investing in the future of the industry.
And it sounds like consumers have a role to play too.
Absolutely, we all do.
So what can we do as consumers to support a more sustainable dairy industry in India?
Well, one of the biggest things is just being informed,
Okay.
doing your research and figuring out which brands are really committed to ethical and sustainable practices.
Right, so looking beyond just the price.
Exactly. And supporting brands that treat their farmers fairly.
choosing to buy milk from cooperatives.
Yeah, exactly. Because ultimately it's about making choices that align with our values,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I think that's really important.
It is, because every time we buy a carton of milk, we're kind of casting a vote.
We're supporting a whole system.
Right. And we need to make sure we're supporting a system that we believe in.
Well said. I think this has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah, it's been fascinating.
We've seen how India went from struggling to produce enough milk to becoming a global dairy powerhouse.
It's an amazing story.
And we've seen how Operation Flood really transformed the whole industry.
It's a great example of how government intervention can sometimes really work.
But we've also seen that there are some big challenges ahead.
Yeah, for sure. It's not all sunshine and roses.
But it seems like there are solutions out there.
Yeah, definitely. It's not hopeless.
It's going to take a lot of hard work and collaboration.
Right. Everyone needs to work together.
Farmers, policymakers, consumers.
Exactly. We all have a part to play.
So to our listeners, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
What do you think the future holds for Indian dairy?
Do you think they can overcome these challenges?
And what role do you think we as consumers can play?
Hit us up on social media. Let us know.
And until next time, happy learning.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Got Milk, the Indian Dairy Context. Subscribe to the podcast. And a reminder, this episode was brought to you by Shunya Agritech, India's first animal nutrition and well-being focused organization. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.